Johnson, 37 years old, and earning a steady but unremarkable $66,000 a year as an IT systems administrator, stared at the departures board at Raleigh-Durham International Airport. The word he'd been dreading for the last hour finally blinked into existence, its stark red letters a final, incontestable judgment. Canceled. Flight 1884 to Atlanta, scheduled for a 9:15 p.m. departure, was a casualty of a vicious line of thunderstorms rolling across the southeast. For a moment, he felt nothing but a dull, weary frustration. It was Tuesday night, 10:23 p.m. His quarterly server maintenance trip, a routine he'd performed for 6 years, was now officially a bust. He was one of maybe 200 people who let out a collective, groaning sigh. The gate agent's voice, tinny and apologetic over the PA system, offered lodging vouchers and rebooking options for the morning. Terrell didn't even move toward the counter. The thought of a sterile, $129 a-night airport hotel room, with its thin blankets and the distant roar of the few planes still taking off, filled him with a profound sense of exhaustion. He just wanted to be home. He wanted his own bed, the one he and his wife Toni had picked out 5 years ago at a Haverty's President's Day sale for $2,200. He pulled out his phone, a 3-year-old Samsung Galaxy S10 with a hairline crack in the corner, and tapped the Uber app. The surge pricing was brutal, a 40-minute ride from RDU to their modest 2-story home in Cary quoted at $78. He winced, but confirmed it anyway. The cost was less than the psychic toll of a night spent in airport purgatory. He sent a quick text to Toni. Flight canceled. Storms. Going to grab a hotel near the airport and fly out in the morning. Don't wait up. Love you. He lied without thinking. It was a simple, practical lie. He didn't want to wake her. She valued her sleep, often complaining that his 6 a.m. alarm was a brutal intrusion on her peace. He imagined walking in close to midnight, the sound of the key in the lock, the creak of the third stair, and her irritated stirring from beneath their $400 down comforter. It was easier this way. Let her sleep. He'd surprise her with coffee in the morning. He pictured her smile, the one that used to feel like the sun coming up just for him. He had no idea how wrong he was, or that in less than an hour, the foundation of his entire world would be reduced to rubble. The ride home was a blur of slick, black asphalt and the rhythmic thump-thump of the Uber driver's windshield wipers. Rain lashed against the windows of the 2018 Toyota Camry, blurring the streetlights into long, watercolor streaks. Tyrell rested his head against the cool glass, his deep brown skin reflecting the passing lights. He was a man built on routine. His life was a series of logical processes and predictable outcomes. Much like the server farms he managed in North Raleigh, there was an order to things. You identify a problem, you diagnose its root cause, you implement a solution. It was clean, it was simple. He thought his marriage was the same, a stable, reliable system. The Uber turned onto their street, Oakmont Drive, a quiet suburban lane lined with maturing oak trees and houses that all hovered around the $450,000 mark. As they approached his house, number 112, Tyrell's eyes picked up something wrong, a disruption in the code. There were 2 cars he didn't recognize. One was a dark blue Ford Bronco, a newer model that probably cost around $55,000, parked on the curb directly in front of his walkway. The other was in his driveway. It was parked in the exact spot where he always parked his 2015 Honda Accord with its 142,000 miles. This car was a gleaming, obsidian black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. Even through the rain-streaked window, it looked impossibly aggressive and expensive, a monument of German engineering worth at least $170,000. It didn't belong in his world of fixed-rate mortgages and careful budgeting. "Here is good," Tyrell said, his voice quiet but firm. The Uber driver, who hadn't spoken a word the whole trip, pulled over about 50 yards past the house, under the flickering orange glow of a streetlight. Tyrell didn't get out. He just sat there, the engine of the Camry idling softly. The clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. His heart, which had been beating at a steady, administrator's pace, began to thud with a heavy, sickening rhythm. A friend of Tony's? He scrolled through a mental list. None of them drove a G-Wagon. Her friends drove Audis and Lexuses, cars bought on finance deals that stretched their upper middle-class salaries. This was different. This was CEO-level wealth. Then he saw the license plate. It was a vanity plate, the kind he always found a little obnoxious. White letters on a black background. R. Green. The name hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Roderick Green, Tony's boss, the CEO of the high-end marketing firm downtown, where she worked as a senior project manager, the man she talked about constantly. Roderick thinks Roderick just closed a $7 million deal with a client in Dubai. Tyrell had met him once, at a company Christmas party 2 years ago. A tall, imposing man with a smile that never quite reached his eyes and a handshake that felt more like a threat than a greeting. He wore a $15,000 Patek Philippe watch. Tyrell remembered because Tony had pointed it out on the way home, her voice full of a kind of breathless admiration he hadn't heard her use for him in years. He knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the rain hitting the roof what was happening inside his house. The system had failed. Not just failed, but suffered a catastrophic, unrecoverable breach. And he, the administrator, was locked out, sitting in a stranger's Toyota, watching the evidence of his own obsolescence parked in his driveway. Have you ever had a moment where the world you thought you knew just dissolved in front of your eyes? Let us know about a time you faced a shocking truth and how you found the strength to move forward. He reached for his phone, his movements slow and deliberate. His hands, usually so steady when rewiring a server rack or soldering a motherboard, were trembling slightly. He opened the camera app. He ignored the rain, the poor lighting. He zoomed in on the G-Wagon, making sure the license plate was perfectly clear. Click. The shutter sound was unnaturally loud in the silent car. He took another, and another. Then he angled the phone to capture both the G-Wagon in his driveway and the Bronco on the street. He documented everything. The digital timestamp on each photo a permanent, incorruptible witness. 11:49 p.m. Tuesday, October 12th. His world had a new timeline. Before this moment and after. The facade of their life had been expertly constructed, mostly by Tony. She was the architect of their social presentation, the curator of their domestic image. Their house in Cary was a perfect example. It was a 2,400 square foot colonial that they had bought for $380,000 6 years ago. To Tyrell, it was a home, a place of comfort and shared history. To Tony, it was a stage. Every piece of furniture was a prop, chosen not for comfort, but for effect. He remembered the fight over the living room sofa. He had wanted a big, plush sectional from Rooms to Go, something you could sink into after a long day, priced at a reasonable $1,800. Tony had insisted on a sleek, low-profile piece from West Elm with clean lines and dove gray upholstery. It cost $3,500 and was about as comfortable as a marble bench. "It's not about sinking, Tyrell," she had explained, her voice laced with that familiar, patient condescension she used when he was being particularly dense. "It's about the aesthetic. It elevates the space." Their life was filled with these elevated spaces. The kitchen featured a $4,000 KitchenAid refrigerator they couldn't afford, purchased on a 24-month interest-free plan from Best Buy. On its stainless steel door, held by a cheap souvenir magnet from a trip to Myrtle Beach they'd taken early in their relationship, was a list of his quarterly Atlanta trips, meticulously written out in her perfect cursive: Jan 11/13, April 12/14, July 12/14, Oaked 11/13. He had put it there so they could plan around his travel, so they could make sure to have a nice dinner before he left, or plan a weekend getaway when he was back. He never imagined it could be used as a different kind of schedule. Tyrell's love was quiet, expressed through acts of service. He was the one who changed the oil in her 2019 Acura RDX, a $42,000 vehicle she leased for $580 a month. He was the one who spent a whole Saturday installing a new garbage disposal, $150 from Lowe's, after the old one jammed. He was the one who cooked dinner most nights, simple, hearty meals of roasted chicken and vegetables, while she scrolled through her phone at the whopping $200 quartz countertop island, sighing about her stressful day. His salary paid the $20,800 mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. Her $185,000 salary, a figure she mentioned often, was for her things. Her things were a constant escalating tide of luxury goods that filled their walk-in closet. A $2,400 Burberry trench coat she'd worn twice. A collection of designer handbags, a Louis Vuitton Neverfull for $900, a Gucci Marmont for $2,600, a black Chanel flat bag that had cost a staggering $8,800. He knew the prices because he'd seen the credit card statements she left on the hall table, statements for cards that were in her name only. The total balance was over $47,000, a secret mountain of debt hidden behind a wall of expensive leather and Italian silk. He had tried to talk to her about it once, about 6 months ago. He'd made a spreadsheet, a simple Excel file showing their combined income versus their expenditures. It was the only way he knew how to make sense of the world. "Tony, honey," he had started, his voice gentle. "I was looking at our finances, and I think we need to maybe pull back a little. We have almost no savings." She had looked up from her iPad, an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom on her face. She was wearing a $300 silk pajama set. "Tyrell, please, do not come at me with one of your little spreadsheets. I handle my money. You handle yours. My career requires a certain image. You wouldn't understand. Your job requires you to wear a $40 polo shirt with a company logo on it." She had gestured dismissively at his work shirt. "We are not the same." The words had stung, but he had swallowed his pride. He loved her. Or more accurately, he loved the woman he thought she was, the woman he'd married 9 years ago, the one who had laughed at his dumb jokes and held his hand in the movie theater. That woman seemed to be fading, replaced by this stranger who measured worth in price tags and saw his stability not as a strength, but as a limitation. A boat anchor holding her back from the glamorous life she felt she deserved. A life personified by men like Roderick Green. His own life was simple. His most prized possession was a set of vintage Technics 1200 turntables he'd bought for $800 in college, a relic from his DJing days. His wardrobe consisted of jeans from Old Navy, $35, his work polos, and a single well-tailored but off-the-rack Hart Schaffner Mark suit, $600, for weddings and funerals. He wore an $89 Timex watch. The contrast was a chasm that had been widening for years. He just hadn't realized that someone else was living in it. Now, sitting in the rain-soaked Uber, the chasm felt like a canyon, and he was on one side, and she was on the other. In a house he paid for, with a man who represented everything she thought he wasn't. The cruelty hadn't started overnight. It was a slow erosion, a series of small, cutting remarks and dismissive gestures that had accumulated over the last 18 months, a time frame he now realized, with a sickening lurch in his stomach, corresponded perfectly with her promotion to senior project manager, working directly under Roderick. There was the dinner with her work friends about a year ago at a trendy downtown restaurant called the Capitol Grill, where a steak cost $90. Tyrell had felt out of place in his best button-down shirt amidst the sea of bespoke suits and designer dresses. Tony's friend, a sharp-tongued woman named Brenda, had asked him what he did for a living. I'm a systems administrator for a data hosting company, Tyrell had said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Brenda had looked at him with a blank stare. Tony had jumped in, laughing a little too loudly. He's the guy who fixes the internet when it breaks, she'd said, waving a dismissive hand. It's all very technical and boring. The table had chuckled politely. Tyrell had felt himself shrink in his chair. He had wanted to explain the complexity of his work, the ballet of managing terabytes of data, of building redundant systems to ensure 99.9999% uptime, of the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem that could cost a client millions if left unchecked. But the moment passed, he just picked at his $50 plate of sea bass and said nothing. Later that night in the car, he'd tried to tell her how it made him feel. You made my job sound like I'm a cable guy. Oh, Tyrell, don't be so sensitive, she'd sighed, checking her reflection in the visor mirror. It was a joke. Lighten up. Besides, what was I supposed to say? My husband manages server racks in a windowless building in North Raleigh. It's not exactly sexy. That was the word she used more and more often. Sexy. Roderick's new deal was sexy. The firm's new office space with its glass walls and skyline views was sexy. Her job, her life, her ambitions, they were all sexy. His life, by implication, was not. Another time, about 8 months ago, they were watching a TV show where a character bought his wife a brand new Porsche. Tony had turned to him during the commercial break, a dreamy look in her eyes. Could you imagine? Just deciding you want a Porsche and going to buy one? It's a nice car, Tyrell had said carefully. But that's a $100,000 car, Tony. That's more than my salary. Her face had hardened instantly. I know how much you make, Tyrell. You don't have to remind me. The rest of the evening was spent in a thick, uncomfortable silence. He felt like he had failed a test he didn't even know he was taking. His paycheck, once a source of pride, a symbol of his ability to provide, to be a reliable partner, had become a mark of shame in her eyes. It was a constant, unspoken indictment of his lack of ambition, his failure to be the kind of man who could buy Porsches on a whim. The accumulation of these moments was like a death by 1,000 cuts. There was the time she forgot to invite him to an important work gala, claiming she thought he'd be bored. He later saw pictures on social media of her laughing with Roderick, her hand resting casually on his arm. There was the way she started turning her phone over whenever he walked into the room. A sudden furtive gesture that always sent a spike of unease through him. When he'd asked her about it, she'd flown into a rage. Are you accusing me of something? After everything I do, the pressure I'm under at work, you're going to come in here and check up on me like a child? I need my privacy, Tyrell. He had backed down, apologizing, feeling guilty for his own suspicion. She was a master at turning his legitimate concerns back on him, making him feel like the one with the problem. Her conversations became a litany of Roderick's accomplishments. Roderick just got back from a conference in London. Roderick is being featured in Forbes. Roderick's wife is a judge, you know. They're a real power couple. She spoke of his life as if it were a novel she was reading, each chapter more glamorous than the last. Tyrell's life, in contrast, must have seemed like a technical manual, dry, predictable, and utterly devoid of plot twists. The most painful memory, the one that replayed in his mind now as he sat watching his house, was from just 3 weeks ago. It was their 9th anniversary. He had made reservations at their favorite Italian restaurant, the one where he had proposed. He'd bought her a delicate sapphire necklace, a modest piece from a local jeweler that had cost him $700, a significant expense he'd saved for over several months. She had been late, arriving at the restaurant nearly an hour after the reservation. She'd swept in, breathless and apologetic. I'm so sorry, baby. We had a crisis with the Miller account. Roderick needed all hands on deck. You know how it is. She had opened his gift at the table. She'd looked at the necklace, her expression unreadable. "It's nice, Tyrell. It's very sweet." She had used the same tone of